Running commentary. We are exploring listening to albums. We sat down and we listened to the artist's vision and concept. Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Dark Side of the Moon was released on the 1st of March 1973 on Harvest Records. It was an out-of-the-box smash. It was a culmination of ideas with Dave Gilmour joining the band in 1967. Syd Barrett, who had previously been the lead in the band, left in 1968 due to mentally related issues. A lot of mentally related issues were cited as being the inspiration for this album. Lots of talk of lunatics and lots of talk of insanity. LSDs obviously go flying around at this point. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones have had their late 60s epiphanies. And I do think that Pink Floyd were watching what the Beatles and the Stones did very carefully. What they did was to take the melody of the Beatles and the bad of the Stones and to fusion it. Breathe comes in and it's immediately transportive. It takes you on a journey. It's like something that you'd hear in a railway or an airport kind of announcement. And then as the track moves forward, then there's the sound of a helicopter rotor spinning around frantically. Responsible for a lot of the sonics on the album is Alan Parsons, who many of you will know from the Alan Parsons Project, who was responsible for Eye in the Sky. What you may not know is that Alan Parsons was also involved in the band Pilot for the hit singles January and Magic, and also for the band Ambrosia, who had the hit with Better Part of Me, or The Biggest Part of Me. I am able to very accurately talk about the things that I've heard. I'm able to very accurately give feeling to what I've heard. And it's because they give you the space to allow that to happen. There's lots of space on the album. The pacing of the lyrics gives you the space to think, as opposed to a barrage of lyrics and instrumentation coming at you where you can't process what's happened. I really appreciate the space that Pink Floyd give you on this album and that they gave themselves on this album. The bells begin for On the Run, which is an instrumental style track. It's a metronome time and the sound beats time. These bells have been used a million times by every other artist. Have Pink Floyd been derivative here? There is definitely influence. Pink Floyd are definitely influenced by what they've come through, but it's almost like gathering everything that they've heard in the late 60s and early 70s, making it their own, adding something to it, and coming out with what this is with Dark Side of the Moon. A Clockwork Orange springs to mind. It's that sort of a concept. It's different style music. There's Clockwork Orange has more of a kind of manic dystopian feel to it. This is more surrender. It's a surrender to the elements. It's a surrender to circumstances. And I feel that the album really achieves magnificent things. Another thing that sprang to mind as I was reviewing the album, and I listened to the album 2 or 3 times. I did it once while doing housework. A la Queen in I Want to Break 3. I was hoovering and cleaning to Dark Side of the Moon, and I was like, this is a really good album to clean to. And our director would surely agree with me. I will say then that what I did was to listen to the album again through headphones and really listen to what was happening. And then I realized, why was this album resonating with me so well? And this is a really important point, and I know that some of you will take me up on it. I realized that what I was experiencing here was essentially second-hand smoke. This was my father's album. This was the album that my dad would continually play to me as a child. So for the same reason that I love Monty Python, and I've no idea why, is the same reason I love Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. I was exposed to it as a child. Time is another instrumental track leading into The Great Gig in the Sky. We have to take pause. This is it. There is cynicism here from anyone that is not willing to let the girl that does all the work on this song. It's really got nothing else to do with apart from the fact that this female works her way vocally through a really wide variety of emotions. There was a lawsuit with this lady, Claire Torrey, who argued that she had been responsible essentially for the writing of this song. There was lots of naysaying and kind of beating around the bush, but in the end, Claire Torrey did get her mention as a non-lexical performer on The Great Gig in the Sky, as she wails her way through it. It was used on commercials. It's probably one of the most recognizable tracks from The Dark Side of the Moon. The sense of surrender that she has here, the sense of desperation, the sense of pleading. She's faking orgasm. She's triumphant. She's heroic. But as the track winds down, now she's desperate, bare. The after effects of all that she's experienced. And I don't think I've ever heard a female vocal which so widely exhibits in one performance the range of human emotions. And for that reason, it's a very, very powerful track. It is in outer space. It's so personal, this record. It's so definitely delivered not towards a group mentality. It's delivered to you personally, like a letter from the mailman. Any color you like describes this spectrum that's on the front of the album. At this point, they can do no wrong. I'm already in lock, stock and barrel. I realize there's 7 or 8 minutes left of this album. It's been an absolute pleasure up to this point. Why isn't it going to continue to be so? Brain Damage. The lunatic is in the hall. This was where the Dark Side of the Moon lyric is taken from. And it responds to when these songs were initially written, I believe in like late 71, early 72, and they were being performed on the live circuit. Pink Floyd would play these songs on the circuit, even though they were to be included on this album at a later stage, giving also the entrance into the release of this album. There was some anticipation of the tracks for the audience. Eclipse is the final sonic thing on the album. And at the end, all you can say is, really? Was this 1973? Was this kind of thing capable in 1973? Were humans capable of this kind of recording in 1973? Wow, wow, wow. It's not where you're from, it's where you're at. And this came to me as I reviewed this album. This hip-hop lyric from Eric B. and Rakim was something that we all took to heart and really embraced as, oh, it's not where you're from, it's where you're at. Listening to Dark Side of the Moon, I have to say, it is where you're from, it's not where you're at. I have to say that the reason this album, which I marked up, I had initially given this album 96%, but as I listened to it a second and a third time, I realized that this was a taste of home. It put me back in the high chair, it put me back in the stroller with my mother, and it would be wrong for me not to give this album the place that it has in my life. It's part of my DNA at this point. And this is my favorite part of describing this album, is that whereas the Human League would be like my first partner in sex, the person I fumbled behind the bicycle shed with, then along came the lover who gave me the real deal. And much to my director's chagrin, or there's another word.
Pure displeasure.
Exactly. This was the real lover. This was the lover that took what the Human League did and gave it to you on a grander scale. So I won't be reducing the marks for Dare or posing any kind of remorse for giving Dare 100%, because I listened to Dare straight afterwards, and I have to say, this is no Dark Side of the Moon, but at the time that it occurred to me, it was that first lover leading me by the hand into the Garden of Eden. And then Dark Side of the Moon came along and reminded me where I'd come from. It is where you're from, it's not where you're at. Final score for Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, 100%. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, recommend it to friends, post comments. Also, if you have an album that you'd like to hear reviewed, we welcome your requests.